Hey guys, we're here today ranking every ghost type Pokemon in competitive, and if you guys enjoy this content and you want to see some more like it, of course, like and subscribe and answer the comment question of the day. What's your favorite ghost type to use right now in competitive? Mine would, honestly, Ghost is a pretty tough one. There's a lot of really cool ones. Since I know that for Fairy, I'm pretty sure I said Fluttermane. So I'm going to answer Cerulege. I think Cerulege is a really fun one. It's kind of a sleeper in my opinion, though I will say I know that a lot of people have been catching up on that one. Dragapult's definitely a close second, though. Again, a lot of people I know have been catching on to Pult this format, and I think that both are going to be really good options as we go forward. But with that said, let's get started with our list today. So obviously going through our list, for one, the S plus tier, this is literally only going to go to a couple, but we'll go to that in a bit. The S plus tier is essentially the Pokemon you outright do hurt yourself not running. There are two for Ghost, and I'm pretty sure they're going to be fairly obvious picks when we do mention those. But essentially, you outright do hurt your team slot not running these Pokemon to where, for example, if I was to consider a special Ghost roll and I didn't consider this Pokemon, both of them are special ghosts, was not spoilery, then you would most likely be outright hurting your team quality as a result of that. The S tiers are going to be for Pokemon like Arceus. Again, Arceus always manages to get an S tier. This one's a really good one. This is probably one of the highest S tier Arceus forms we're going to get. This one borders on S plus just because the fact that Ghost is such a good offensive typing, and the fact that this is a 120 base power special Ghost move with no drawback is pretty huge. And as well as for physical stats, having stuff like Phantom Force is pretty huge. Ultimately, this one, it's definitely one of the best Arceus forms. I think it just misses out on S plus, truthfully, just because of the fact that I feel like there's a lot of really good dark types in competitive. While this can obviously tire around them and become an absolute monster, I do actually still think that actually, no, this Arceus will get an S plus. This one's probably gonna be fringe on S plus, but this Arceus, for nothing else, does have the benefit of the Ghost typing plus like a Terra and then any sort of coverage. It's really easy to get a perfect coverage set with Ghost, actually. And having the no drawback option on the special side, meanwhile, Phantom Force can be a great way to break through Protect, for example, while still having stuff like E-Speed as a really good priority. This is definitely one of the best offensive Arceus forms for sure. And it benefits a lot from Terra this format. I'm meant to go over that one later. If it was going to be an S plus, it's my bad. It's going to be one of our few S plus Arceuses this generation, in my opinion. Anyway, A tier is going to be for Pokemon that are still fairly strong, but they're not necessarily, once we get out of the S tiers, they're no longer picks that I would argue as you would most likely consider these on a team. They're going to be fairly viable mons. You're going to encounter them a lot in the format, but they're not going to be things that you would outright expect to be putting on a team, but they're going to still be things that you would expect to fight in a laddering session. B tiers are going to be for Pokemon you're probably going to fight a couple of times per laddering session. These might be things that you would fight every once in a while, but overall, they're definitely at least kind of replaceable by the upper tiers. C tiers are going to be for things that have a specific niche encountering an S tier, or at least a specific role in the metagame that is very unique to only them. The D tiers are going to be for things that are mostly YouTuber picks. These might be things you find in a thumbnail of my videos, but you're not going to expect to do well with these in any given tournament. And then F tiers are going to be for Pokemon that are so unviable, I wouldn't even use them unless it's specifically for the fact to say that I used them. But with that said, let's get started. All right, so with that said, our first ghost type, I guess besides Arceus Ghost today, is going to be Gengar. Now, Gengar is an interesting one. I think that Gengar's biggest issue is the fact that it's just kind of outclassed by a lot of other ghost types. When we think of special ghost types this generation, we're thinking of Pokemon like Fluttermane, we're thinking of Pokemon like Goldengo. We're not really going to Gengar anymore, which is kind of unfortunate. We're going to put Gengar in the B tier. I think it's a little bit different when we're not doing just a series rating tier list like we did for Series 2 when we put Gengar in the C tier. I think for Gengar specifically, if we're tiering among ghost types, this thing is actually pseudo-viable. The speed tier at 110 is pretty good, and with stuff like Icy Wind support, as well as moves like Thunder Wave and other statuses, this actually gets a lot of really valuable support moves that it can offer to a team. And while I think it's a little bit unviable in this current format, I think that the potential for Gengar to be a really good threatening Pokemon is up there. It's definitely a lower end B tier mon for sure. This might go down to C tier as we continue the tier list, but I feel like that among just the typing mons, this thing definitely does have a little bit more of a niche to it. 110 speed is pretty good. This gets a lot of good utility like T-Spikes, and it's really just a really good support mon. It's essentially a really good roll compression. If I want to run something that can both function like Fluttermane being a really good offensive threat while still having the support of a Pokemon like, for example, Murkrow, where you can definitely just make a lot of different status options work on Gengar, and fairly viably at that too. To name a few things this could do, Clear Smog support is pretty valuable as an alternative to Haze, but it also does get Haze. It just depends on if you value the damage there more or not. But Haze is typically better. You have Disable and Encore. You have Hex, which can take advantage of your other status options, which for statuses you do have Thunder Wave and Will-O-Wisp, as well as Toxic too. You have all three. Speaking of status, you get Toxic Spikes. You have Reflect type, which can kind of be useful, but it's not really that good in VGC. It's okay in singles at best. You have Taunt, which is pretty useful. Perish Song, which is pretty useful. Nightshade is a good way to just kind of stall break as well for this Pokemon. Like Gengar could do a lot. It can even do like the curse shenaniganry that Mimikyu can do, but I would argue that Mimikyu can do it a bit better. This thing gets Trick. Like this thing genuinely has a lot of good support. Icy Wind, Trick Room even with Imprison could be kind of useful. You can go for Skill Swap, I guess is okay. I don't know. I know I'm just running through movesets, but truthfully, like among support mons, Gengar gets a lot of really unique support. And the fact that it gets all of those options together, that's actually extremely rare to find, like all of those different support options on one given Pokemon. So yeah, we'll give Gengar a B tier. Hisuian Typhlosion is kind of interesting. It's a cool speed tier if nothing else, fairly offensive. One thing I will say it's kind of a knack against it though is the fact that Typhlosion, Hisuian form, being at that just under 100 mark, does kind of have some competition with Pokemon like Chi-Yu, which will actually just definitively outpace you. And also, I would argue that the Frisk ability is actually super bad in Close Team Sheet. If Pokemon kept the Open Team Sheet format, this actually could have been, well, a Close Team Sheet format, this could have actually been a very good ability for scouting things like random citrus berries or assault vests or safety goggles and stuff like that. But with an Open Team Sheet format, which is, it's typically the way that official tournaments are being played, albeit I know the current challenge right now is Close Sheet. That's giving points for worlds, but it definitely does hurt a lot of the potential for Hisuian Typhlosion to be viable. Now this thing will be decent like best of one close team sheet. It'll actually kind of have a niche there at scouting items as well as being enough of a threat, I guess, to be good in best of one format. But otherwise though, I think typically this is just at best a YouTuber mon, so we're gonna give it the D tier. Mischievous is a YouTuber mon for sure, but it's actually kind of viable. I'd actually argue you can make a case for C tier. I'm going to put it at C tier for now, actually. This thing is weirdly enough a good Violet Trick Room setter. It gets a lot of the same utility that Gengar gets, albeit not all of it. For example, I believe you do miss out on Haze, for example. Yeah, if we're going through stuff, you miss out on like Haze, but you do get at least a Will-O-Wisp, Thunder Wave. You miss out on T-Spikes, you miss out on Encore Disable, but you still get a lot of the important stuff like Curse, Nasty Plot's kind of cool, but it's not really like sport stuff. Pain Split, Perish Song, Thunder Wave, Trick Room, Will-O-Wisp. It's a pretty good Trick Room setter at that too, and with Levitate, this is actually a pretty decent Terra option with stuff like Terra Steel being kind of viable. It's a good enough Ghost type. I actually do think that Mischievous unironically is almost viable mon. Sableye is actually kind of viable. This is gonna get top of C tier. Really good support with stuff like Encore Disable, nice Prankster. Actually, I'm gonna give it B tier. I think this is definitely B tier. Nice support options. Essentially, it's like these three all kind of do the same thing, but Gengar gets the speed advantage naturally. This one is Prankster, and this one's at least a good Trick Room setter with Levitate being good with the Terra. They're fairly comparable in what they do, though. They're all kind of support Pokemon at this format. They're not, none of them are really good offensive threats. None of them are really good just as like hard walls. They're all just nice support picks with stuff like Will-O-Wisp and just valuable utility otherwise. Sableye's biggest benefit though is also the dual screens. It's a really good screen setter. Definitely a B tier for sure. Banat sucks, not giving it time of day. Drifblim. Drifblim's kind of okay, actually. We're going to give this thing a C tier. It's a pretty good Tailwind mon, actually. And with stuff like Aftermath, it's actually not terrible. It's a cool Terra option. Trank Sap is great utility, as well as stuff like Will-O-Wisp. It's a decent enough option, actually, as far as a Ghost-type utility Pokemon goes. It borders on B tier, but I think that one of the biggest things holding it back is the fact that it kind of does suck without just... Unless you're clicking a support move, it kind of sucks. And I think it's specifically only kind of viable because of the support moves it uniquely offers, as well as the Unburden ability just to ensure they get off quickly. But overall, it's kind of a shit mon. We'll give it C tier. Mischievous. Mischievous, I would argue, is actually worse than... Mismagius, I'd argue, is worse than Mischievous. We're going to give this thing a D tier. Levitate does kind of carry it, with the fact that it can kind of just do the same terrible shit that Mischievous can do. But the issue with Mismagius is the fact that it's slow among fast ghost types. Stuff like Gengar outpaces it even, which is already not that great among fast ghosts when we have stuff like Suizorok, which at least is a better native typing, or stuff like Spectrier, Dragapult, Fluttermane, etc. on the mix. It's still not great, but I will say one benefit that this thing does get is, again, Levitate. So we can do the similar roles to Mischievous, where at the very least it has the ability to tear into an immunity to ground, which is kind of cool with stuff like Terra Electric or Steel or Fire. This thing does at least have a kind of okay niche as a Nasty Plot user, but I think it still is objectively just worse than Mischievous. Spiritomb. Spiritomb is actually kind of good. I've actually come around on this mod a lot after the recent members video, and I think I've actually even under-tiered it in Series 2. This thing could have genuinely been like a B-tier pick. It's actually a kind of good Trick Room setter. I think the typing is really good. This is a great Terra Pokemon. Get some nice support as well, and it's bulky enough to actually make it work. I'm actually going to rate this thing above Gengar. It's unironically a really strong B tier, and I think that when the Series 3 tier list comes around, I'm actually going to have to rate this thing a lot higher. It was truthfully, I think, one of the mons I was the most strong about going into Series 2. But Spirit Dream's unironically really good. Pressure is a great ability, as well as Infiltrator to get around screens or substitutes and all that. It's a really amazing way at defeating Dozo, because between Pain Split and Will-O-Wisp, as well as just going through Substitute on Dozo, but like the sub-protect sets, it's actually like a genuinely good Dozo check. And I'm kind of curious to see if we'll see like a Terra Grass set in the future, like Terra Fairy specifically for that Dozo matchup, because I think it actually has a lot of merit there. Overall, though, amazing Trick Room Pokemon. I think that we'll see a bit more of this in Series 3, personally, but definitely a B tier. Frostlass. Frostlass is kind of okay. Similarly to Mischievous, this is definitely like a D tier Pokemon for sure. It's probably the weakest in our D tier, I would argue, because despite the fact that it does have a bit of a speed advantage on Mischievous, really the biggest benefit I can actually give this thing, unironically, never mind, doesn't even get Sheer Cold. I was gonna say, because the biggest thing I was thinking was the fact that it gets Sheer Cold. But for what it's worth, it does at least get some good utility like Taunt, Memento. It gets Nightshade. I think this thing also, no, it doesn't get T-Spikes or Spike. Oh, no, it does get Spikes, not T-Spikes. You could go for like, I guess, the Switcheroo set that's kind of okay. Destiny Bond is kind of okay. I guess get some okay support. The Ice typing is kind of cool with Veil, but like you're not really gonna run Frostlass and Veil. I'm actually gonna give this thing a F tier. I've talked myself out of it. At least this thing has the immunity as its ability. That's really about it. Rotom gets the D tier. Actually, no, Rotom gets the F tier, but it's top of F tier. Just the stats are kind of too weak. Other Rotom forms just have a much better time. It's not that good. Giratina. On Dragons, I gave this thing like a fucking C tier, and honestly, I stand by it. I'm gonna get a lot of hate for this one. We'll give this one a B tier. The immunity ability is actually kind of useful, but it's gonna get bottom of B tier because running Giratina at all is just a huge fucking opportunity cost. I will say though, Terra Steel Giratina Origin might unironically have a case in this format. I think it could essentially just be like a kind of a shitty Fluttermane, not a shitty Fluttermane, like a shitty Mischievous, where you're running like Wisp and then like Stabs and then probably like, I think this thing gets Pain Split. You could also just run Rest at that point, to be completely honest. Even if it does get Pain Split, I think Rest might be better. Let's see, does this, yeah, I guess Pain Split. Yeah, like a Pain Split, dual Stab, and then like Hex, Draco, Pain Split, and then Will-O-Wisp could be kind of decent on this. It could also be a kind of cool Tailwind option. Actually, I don't even know if Giratina kept Tailwind. I would actually have to check that as well. It does not get Tailwind in this format. Okay, so it's not as great, but you do still get like T-Wave for support, at least as far as speed control goes. It's not great, but Giratina at least has enough coverage. You can make Calm Mind sets maybe work. The Origin form will actually for once be better than regular in my opinion. I'm gonna give this thing a bottom of C tier, and this one gets a bottom B tier for sure. Though I think you can make a case that they're both C tier mods. I'm just trying to be kinder to Giratina, because last time people got very upset by the restricted opportunity cost when I tiered this thing at the fucking C and D tier. I'm pretty sure it was in the Dragon tier list. It was not a happy opinion. So I'm trying to be a little bit more optimistic about our box arts, but I still think they kind of suck. And I think Giratina borders on D tier, to be completely honest, but I'm going to give it benefit of the doubt because the stats are a lot better than these. Hisuian Zoroark. This one's kind of interesting, actually. Regular Zoroark's not that great in competitive, but I think a Hisuian form might actually have a bit of a niche with that immunity, as well as the fact that it does seem to actually keep the 110 speed. I know for a fact that at least in the first version of the game, that was at 105, but it does actually seem like ever since the 1.2 patch that it did get its 110 speed back, so Hisuian Zoroark actually does have a bit of merit again. Specifically in the fact that this thing actually ends up being a really decent Choice Scarf option with 110 speed, which means that, of course, obviously, you could just trick Scarf Illusion, and you can definitely make a lot of stuff work, considering you can maybe buff this as a Dark type, like one of the Ruin Pokemon. For example, I probably wouldn't actually do that. I think King Gambit could actually be an amazing thing to bluff this as, though. And then instead of going for like a slow fighting type move on it, you would instead of going for like a slow dark type, you would have to click a fighting type move versus, or maybe click like a substitute against to stop protect. You're taking a Trick Scarf from Hisuian Zoroark, and I think it could work out really well, actually. This will be an amazing Gambit partner. This thing definitely actually gets a C tier. I'm going to put it like right at the top of C tier. This one will be interesting to see, in my opinion. I think that this one might unironically get used. We've actually even seen Zoroark in some YouTuber vids. But Zoroark is definitely a YouTuber mon. This one might unironically be kind of viable. Hoopa. Hoopa's kind of interesting, actually, as well. I could see Hoopa, weirdly enough, tearing into something like a Terra normal set even, or just like a Terra dark set, and being kind of viable. You could also maybe like Terra, I don't know. You're probably gonna want to Terra into something that's like a ghost or dark resist, whether that's like a dark type. I think dark would probably be the best for what it's worth. But Hoopa could be kind of decent on Trick Room with like a room service set. This thing gets a really good coverage spread. And at level 50, if you were to take into account the room service, this thing actually can get to like really slow depths of speed to where you're even underpacing a lot of like common Trick Room mons. To put in perspective, this thing hits around like 44, 45 with the room service. So you could unironically even outpace like minus speed 0 IV King Gambit and Iron Hands and go for like a Terra Fighting set and be pretty fucking viable that way. Terra Fighting would be great to just massacre King Gambit, and also you would still be able to check the Iron Hands naturally with your stabs. This thing could have some merit, actually. I'm going to give base Hoopa like a B tier. We're putting it at least above Giratina Origin. I can get the logic in this one if nothing else. This one could kind of have a place in competitive. I think Terra does help Hoopa a lot, actually. And if we do get another mythical format, this one might unironically have some merit for it. So we'll give it that. Mimikyu, our first A tier ghost type. A lot of the really strong ghost types are coming up on the list. We're about to get in some really fucking good ghost type territory. Mimikyu is one of those. I think Mimikyu is actually pretty good this generation. It's a lot better than Generation 8, where Dynamax was a huge, like, just nuisance for it. But Mimikyu with stuff like Curse, as well as the SD Life Up sets, it's actually a pretty viable mono competitive. It's a great Trick Room setter, especially because of the built-in disguise, where you need to essentially dual target Mimikyu. And if you pair this next to another Pokemon that can also set Trick Room, or just some other really big offensive threat, you can actually make a lot of stuff work for Mimikyu. The sneak priority is great. You can invest to kill Fluttermane, which is actually a really huge deal, because Fluttermane is such a big deal in competitive. It's one of the most threatening Pokemon of all time, let alone among the ghost typing. But yeah, ultimately though, Mimikyu is definitely a really strong A tier. I think it's really one of the best Trick Room setters we have right now, actually. It's really consistent at getting Trick Room up, has some great utility, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Mimikyu provides in future formats. Palossand, this thing gets an F tier. It's definitely worse than Frostlass. I'm not going to go over it a ton. Oricorio Ghost actually can get a C tier. We're going to put this thing right above Mischievous. This thing's typing is really good, and the Dancer ability is actually really valuable on it. Having an immunity to priority while being able to take advantage of the speed boosting Dancer next to a Volcarona, while also then having a nice option of your own to boost speed with Quiver Dance is pretty valuable. You can go for something like a Terra Fighting, and you can manage against your weak matchups for stuff like King Gambit, and that could actually be pretty decent. Or you could throw this thing in Psychic Terrain and go for like just a pure Terra Ghost typing and then get around priority completely that way. Ultimately, this is definitely a strong C tier, I think. It just, Oricorio itself is kind of weak. Decidueye. Now, I will say I used Decidueye actually in the Regulation C video, and I think I realized this thing unironically does have some like kind of niche. When I say Regulation C video, I know it's not Regulation C. I have to preface that because a lot of people thought that I genuinely thought this was a Regulation C mod, when that was not the case. But it unironically could have merit if this thing was legal in VGC. It's a pretty decent check to Dozo, actually. Similarly to how you can run like Leaf Storm on Amoonguss as a check to Dozo, this thing could kind of do the same, and its speed tier is really good. You can get some nice built-in priority. Your coverage is great. This thing gets some good support and nothing else, and I think that at worst it's a D tier mon, but I think it's a high D tier. I think Decidueye is kind of just a whatever ghost type as it is. But if nothing else, this thing does have a lot of benefit with Terra. You could go with stuff like Terra Ice as well, which could help a lot with, I forgot what the merit with Ice was. Oh, right, with flying types. It's really good for flying type matchups that way, or you can go with like Terra Electric for the same thing, but you're obviously going to become weak to ground that way. Terra Fire is pretty good too, actually. It's a really good option to checking steals. Like, you have a lot of actually really good Terra types with this thing. It's a definite D tier for sure. This thing right here gets bottom of D tier. Just Poltergeist only gets it because of Shell Smash and Strength Sap. It gets some good utility while having Shell Smash. And that's really about it. It's kind of a shit mon otherwise, but it's okay with Terra. Dragapult. Dragapult's an A tier. This actually gets a really strong A tier. Now, if we were doing the Series 3 tier list, I would actually give this thing an S tier, but I think we're about to get into a lot of ghost types that I do think genuinely just outright demolish any reason to run Dragapult. Like some actual genuinely gross Pokemon. A lot of Pokemon that actually tread on that S plus tiering too. But Dragapult is still a really good ghost type. It's borderline an S tier. I think the one thing holding Dragapult back, truthfully, is the fact that there's a lot of things that I think are more consistent at dealing damage. But I think we finally found a really strong core with Qianpao Dragapult to where this thing is unironically kind of viable in doubles. The Dragon Darts with self-targeting, well, with smart targeting, I should say, as well as the sort of Ruin ability is actually an incredibly deadly core. And especially with the lack of good fairies in this format, we might unironically actually see some really good Dragapult usage coming up. If nothing else, I think a Dragapult at least could be a decent option in this Series 3 format. And I think if this was just a Series 3 tier list, I would give it an S tier. But I think that we have enough, like, actually really threatening fucking Pokemon to where I can't justify putting Dragapult in there for the Ghost type tier list. Since we're gonna get a couple unreleased Pokemon that will just truly diminish any reason to put this thing in S tier. And I think it's really just, I can't justify putting it next to those threats, really, is what it is. But it's kind of weird, too, because I feel like putting it next to Pokemon like Mimikyu is also kind of demeaning to it. But I feel like if it's closer to Mimikyu, and it might just be a meta trend, too, that we see phase out later in the format. But currently, actually, Dragapult is kind of hot, so I don't mind putting it in the A tier. I think this thing will have a lot of potential, though, in Regulation C, and it's something that, at the very least, right now, you guys definitely got to keep an eye on. Spectre, definitive S tier. This thing is borderline S+, but the only reason I'm not putting it in S+ is because this thing right here. Objective best ghost type of all time. This thing truthfully actually could deserve like an S++ tier if we're going to be completely honest. It might be the unironic best Pokemon this entire game. I would argue personally it's actually better than Miraidon. I think that this generation, Terra Calyrex Shadow is going to be, genuinely speaking, like a fucking behemoth to play around. This thing is one of the best Terra Pokemon I can imagine in the entire fucking game. The 150 speed is absolutely, like, just insane. It's so fucking vile. This thing outpaces, it outpaces stuff like fucking Zacian Crown, Dragapult, Miraidon, Koraidon. Like, this thing is fucking obscene. It's genuinely obscene. The only Pokemon that, like, actually doesn't tie it and just outright outpaces it is, like, a Lecky or, like, Booster Energy Pokemon. But, like, to think that you need something that fast, and as well, not only that, but you could just throw this thing on fucking Tailwind and just go for a fucking Astro Barrage, and most Pokemon will just drop to that. Whether it's, even if you don't go for, like, a Terra Ghost, most Pokemon will just drop to that. We've seen a lot of priority with stuff like Fake Out and E-Speed being very huge in this generation, especially through Pokemon like Terra Normal Dragonite. And this thing having outright built-in immunity to that is pretty good, as well as the fact that you could throw this thing on Psychic Terrain, and indeed now is a really good fast mode for you as well. This thing is definitely like the epitome of just a really good Pokemon. And it's so fucking good that I would actually argue putting Arceus down like a whole tier just to differentiate it. But I think at the same time that Arceus is such a threatening Pokemon, I don't want to. Spectre is just Calyrex Ghost Light. This thing is still pretty good. Spectre being 130 speed kind of hurts it though. This thing is still able to just stack out Grenade boost with like a Tower Fighting set plus like Shadow Ball, Nasty Plot, and then probably like Protect. Could be really good. But overall though, definitely a really strong option in my opinion for sure. So we're gonna give Spectre an S tier. Basculegion, this form right here gets an S tier. This actually gets like top of S tier. This is gonna literally redefine how good Rain is. With the Last Respects move obviously being really broken, we've seen that on Houndstone actually giving it a place in the meta. But the difference being though, this one actually takes advantage of a weather that does kind of benefit from having it. Sand doesn't really care about Houndstone truthfully because the fact that Kingambit puts a lot of pressure on Sand anyway, and it's one of the best dark types in the game. But Basculegion actually being a fairly good Pokemon just outside of Rain, thanks to adaptability being such a strong option, and the fact that you can play a 50-50 with Tailwind versus Rain, and obviously you can still run it on both because Pelipper does get Tailwind anyway. Basculegion will put up a ton of pressure on teams, and I genuinely think this will become an offensive monster late game, to where we will see teams with like Paladin, Basculegion, Pelipper, and then just a bunch of grass type coverage with just really good flying types like Zapdos. This will unironically redefine how Rain does play though, and I think it deserves the S tier for sure. It's borderline an S+. Basculegion Female gets a bottom of A tier solely because of the fact that I think it's going to be weaker just because of the fact that it's a special attacker. But at the very least though, Basculegion with like adaptability and Switch Home will still be good. This is like 100 special attack with stuff like Hex. You can still get stuff like Chilling Water or Hydro Pump, which are fairly viable options. You get Ice Beam. The coverage is better on special, but at the same time though, at least the coverage is higher damaging naturally for special, but the physical stuff with Last Respects is just too fucking good to pass up with male Basculegion. So we're gonna give that one the S tier and female the A tier. Skeledirge. Skeledirge, so similarly to with the Dragapult and the Spiritomb, if this was a Series 3 tier list, the tiering would be different for this. But I'm definitely going to give this thing an A tier, like a bottom of A tier, just among the ghost types. With Unaware as well as Terra typing, this is a really good, actually, defensive ghost type in the format. It's great. Check to Dozo. It's a really good option to just whiz past X stuff. You get natural recovery and slack off, and I think this is picking up a little bit in Series 3, albeit it's still not great, and it wasn't exactly great to begin with in Regulation 2 to go off of, but it was a really good pick in Regulation 1 at the very least, and I think it could see usage in later formats, with stuff like Terra Normal being a really good check actually to Basculegion, as mentioned above. It's a really good Wispmon. It's really good just an unaware threat off, defensively speaking, and it can snowball teams a lot in Trick Room. So I'm going to give this thing a definite A tier. It's a really strong ghost type for sure. Houndsome actually also will get the B tier. We're going to put this thing like right at the front of B tier. This thing kind of makes Sand viable right now, at least outside of just Lycanroc Sand Flinch. With Last Respects, you could actually make this thing into an awesome late game cleaner. However, at the same time, it is kind of gimmicky. And I think that if nothing else, Houndstone is a little bit hard to manage, but at the very least, Last Respects is kind of damning, and it's something where if you don't value it, it will just clean through even resistances because of the fact that they took so much damage. The move is a little bit worse in VGC, and unlike the Basculegion where you get adaptability or just a much higher attack stat, because Houndstone only has 101, meanwhile Basculegion Male has 112, which is a huge difference when we're talking about like a move with 300 base, 11 base attack will make differences in KOs for sure. But Houndstone is still kind of viable, if nothing else. Body press is going to go down it, especially with Fluffy. This can be a good defensive option too, so we'll give the thing a B tier. Bramble. Bramble's kind of shit, but at the very least, I unironically think it's less of a team opportunity cost than Hisui and Typhlosion. Actually, I'm going to put this thing right above Decidueye. This thing is a little bit more consistent, actually. Am I? So I think it's weird. Again, with the regulation C tier list, I would put it lower, but I'm not actually gonna put this thing above Giratina. Nope, never mind. That's a bit of a hot take. Too much of a hot take for this video. But this thing with Wind Rider is actually pretty good. The ability to boost its attack with Tailwind is pretty good, and if nothing else, this thing gets some pretty good utility as well with stuff like Strength Tap, for example. So we'll give this thing a D tier if nothing else. It's cool with Wind Rider, but that's really the thing that carries it out of outright mediocrity in the F tier. It's just Wind Rider is such a good ability, being able to raise the attack of a physical option like this. So we're gonna give this thing, the D tier. Goldengo. Goldengo is an S tier for sure. I think you can make a case that Goldengo is either the strongest or weakest S tier, depending on how you want to look at it. I think personally, I'm going to put Goldengo at the bottom of S tier, just because I do think that despite the fact that this thing is such a good offensive threat, not being able to be status is huge. I think this thing having 130 special Moxie while also having a pretty low drawback special typing and Ghost, with then the ability to tear it into an option to snowball through a lot of checks with fighting, is a little bit scarier than Goldengo would be in that regard, because you could essentially just run Terra Blast, Hex, and then like Nasty Plot and Protect and just beat any team pretty much. And Basculegion being able to not only be threatening with and without weather, but also the fact that it has two really strong abilities that are going for it, and it's just a much easier to mon. It's a much more unique mon along the typing as well. So I think that Goldengo, in my opinion, is the weakest of the three, but it still is an objectively really strong S tier ghost type. Mega Rain is an objective amazing move. Being a steel spread option is really huge for it, especially with the special steel typing, which is fairly hard to actually come across a good special steel. So we'll give Goldengo an S tier for sure. Fluttermane. Fluttermane gets slots right in here. I will say that Fluttermane will get completely eclipsed. Well, actually, that's a lie. So I would say that Fluttermane would get completely eclipsed by Cali Ghost, but I'm going to be honest, anytime you're not running Cali Ghost, you're probably throwing Fluttermane on the team instead and then just picking two other box arts to run with it. I think really, if you're not running one of those two, you are kind of choking a team that would be in that like restricted format. But otherwise, if you're not essentially competing with like Cali Ghost, I do think that Fluttermane is actually kind of unrivaled as far as the ghost typing goes, and really the only reason that Arceus Ghost can even manage to stay in this tier is because the fact that it has built-in physical priority and the fact that it's just the physical equivalent of these two. But Fluttermane is still really fucking obnoxious. That Ghost Fairy typing is like one of the best typings in the game, and it's so fucking hard to switch around. And the fact this thing as well has the incredible ability of Paralysis to even just outpacing a lot of Scarf options. This thing is genuinely like a vile Pokemon. It's such a gross Pokemon in competitive. It's one of those things where power creep hit, and I don't know why Game Freak decided to make this. This thing, unironically, is probably better than the Koraidon and Miraidon as far as VGC goes. And I strictly mean that in the sense that this thing is able to take advantage of both so easily. And the fact that it is such a low risk, whereas with Koraidon and Miraidon, you need to give up a restricted slot. But you just run this thing with either of those two, and it benefits from both of those being in the metagame, because it's two other really fast Pokemon that this thing just takes advantage of with booster energy and just massacres through with Terra Fairy. Objective S+, in my opinion. Ceruledge. Ceruledge gets a solid A tier. I'm putting this thing actually right below Mimikyu. If nothing else, this is a really good priority option. We've seen a lot of Terra Steel sets popping up recently, and I do think it's actually the future of this Pokemon. I know the Terra Grass is really huge for the immunity, well, the resistance to ground options, and with the Terra Fires, not with Terra Fire, with the Flash Fire being a really good way to help patch up your grass weakness, I think it's really good for it. But I think a Terra Steel just having a really good matchup into Fluttermane to then just try and bulk up plus Shadow Sneak it is really, really useful actually for it. And it becomes a really good resistance to stuff like Shadow, well, it's a neutral option for Shadow Ball, but still keeps the resistance to Fairy, which is important. I'm going to definitely give Sterilage an A tier. I think the future for Sterilage is actually really high, and I'm curious to see where it's going to end up going in competitive. Finally, though, we have Annihilate. Now, Annihilate, I think, is also interesting. I think similar to Dragapult, you can make a case for A or S tier, actually, when we look at the full list. Rage Fist is a broken enough move, though. We're actually going to view this thing in B S tier. Now, I will say that I think a Goldengo, actually, despite the fact that it's a little bit more replaceable than Annihilate, considering this is a physical ghost, it's really hard one to come across. I do think that at the same time, Goldengo just has a lot better of a presence that it brings to games. And it's one of those things where the only reason that Goldengo isn't shooting in the top 10 slot anymore is because of Flutterman existing. But Goldengo is still one of the best ghost types you could possibly use in the game. And I think that just goes leaps and bounds about how good it is. Annihilate is really good, but it's kind of inconsistent. It's really good next to Mousehold. It's objectively one of the best cores you can run with it. But final Gambit sets are kind of hard to justify now that mons like Fluttermane are rampaging the tier and just getting damage off, or the fact that Tailwind is still one of the best playstyles you can play. Not only this, but I think that it's a little bit easier to try and just target through Annihilate, but stuff like Amoonguss being really viable. This is still a pretty good option, though, and I can definitely get around Amoonguss matchup issues with stuff like Vital Spirit being a really good ability for it. It's definitely a really good physical ghost type. I think that Annihilate is still one of the best options you could run in the game, let alone as a ghost type. But I do think that it's weak among the S tiers, but it's really because that Ghost has one of the best S tiers we're looking at in the entire game. To put it in perspective, I think Ghost's S tiers rival most of the other types' S pluses, let alone their S tiers. But at the very least, though, I think it's just a power creep thing. Ghost is really just one of the best types you can get in the whole game, and truthfully, I think we could actually probably put some of these even in the S plus. But for the sake of, I'm just going to kind of downscale the whole tier list, and I think that works out better that way. But let me know your guys' thoughts down below. And if you enjoy and you want to see some more content like this, like and subscribe. Shout out to the channel members, of course, being Josh, aka Ultra Player, Mia, Zeke Zero, Matt O'Shea, Bbat, Anna Tapur, Timo Mueller, and Fonzie. Your guys' support is greatly appreciated on the channel. And if you guys want to support the channel for just a couple dollars a month, feel free to click the channel membership button down below. We have a channel member video coming up soon where we're going to be laddering. It seems like the option that won the poll as of right now is the all 4 ruins, but I'm going to give it until I get home from work today to start building that team. So technically, if you guys watch this within like the first hour or two of it going up, you'll actually get to see the poll and you'll still get to vote. But with that said, I will see you guys later. Until then, peace out, guys.